it's time to log off your phone. The concern is that people are becoming computer and particularly specifically cell phone, smartphone addicted. There's an article by Hannah Kuchler in today's Financial Times newspaper. She notes, even in Silicon Valley, people are turning off the notifications that constantly buzz for their attention. I've basically turned off the notifications on, I think, every app on my phone. And curiously, changing the colors on their screens to a less seductive scale of gray. In other words, you could take all the color out of your smartphone. And in this article, Hannah Kuchler is talking about how big tech now is being thought of as big tobacco. Basically, they're selling a product that addicts people. And there's people pushing back. JANA Partners and California Teachers Pension are asking Apple to make their phones less addictive to children or give parents options to limit their children's phone use. Arjuna Capital and New York State Common Retirement Fund have submitted proposals to Facebook, she writes, and Twitter, calling them to stop sexual harassment on their platforms. I guess that's kind of a slightly different argument. But the point is that the average American spends about 4 hours a day looking at their smartphone, and probably another 4 hours a day looking at their computer. And in this article, she's talking about getting public service announcements to warn parents and warn people that, you know, your smartphone may be addictive and all this kind of thing. Ultimately, you know, like non-smoking areas in restaurants, you have no smartphone zones in restaurants, and you know, eventually, she ends the article, smartphones could be banned from all public places, shunned in favor of actually giving our attention to the people around us instead. And I've always thought it a little strange. I walk into a restaurant and I see, you know, people sitting at a table and they're both looking at their phones instead of looking at each other. Although I have to confess, there have been times, particularly when news is breaking, when Louise and I have been out and, you know, suddenly Trump has tweeted something and it's like, okay, we're both looking at our phones. But the point that is missed by this article, and that you're only finding by and large in the literature of the psychological and psychiatric communities, has to do with a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a compound that gives us a high, basically. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. Dopamine is what spikes in your body when you drink caffeine. Dopamine is what spikes in your body when you snort cocaine or when you take crystal meth. Those all almost exclusively stimulate dopamine and you know, things associated with the dopamine system. And of course, adrenaline, adrenochrome, and those kind of things. But principally, it's all about the dopamine. And so we know that if you can give somebody a drug that stimulates dopamine production, or that jacks dopamine, that they will use that drug over and over and over again, even to their detriment, even to the point of, I mean, you know, look at crack addicts or meth heads, you know, whose teeth are falling out and their bodies are falling apart and their livers are decaying and they're dying. They're literally dying because they're addicted to the dopamine that drug, whether it's crack or whether it's meth or whatever it may be, that drug is stimulating in their bodies. Well, it turns out this is something that the people at Silicon Valley know all about. They're real familiar with this. And in fact, you play a little solitaire game on your phone, for example. And if you win it, boom, you know, your phone goes off with a little explosion of starbursts or colors or whatever. It gives you a reward. And that reward stimulates dopamine. You tweet something, somebody tweets it back. You get, oh, gee, look at that. There's a small dopamine hit there. But mostly it's the programs. These apps are designed to be highly addictive. They call it stickiness in Silicon Valley, but it's really addiction. To make us come back over and over and over again to them so that by the end of the week, we're looking back and going, geez, you know, this week I spent 7 hours playing solitaire on my phone. Or I spent 7 hours, you know, thumbing through YouTube videos on my phone. Or I spent 7 hours, I mean, fill in the blank, watching cat videos. You know, whatever your particular thing may be, you know, each one of us gets our dopamine high off slightly different things. But dopamine is at the core of porn addiction, is at the core of gambling addiction, it's at the core of most drug addictions, it's at the core of sex addiction, it's at the core of most of these addictions that just grab us and that we seem to have no willpower over. And increasingly, app developers and smartphone manufacturers and website developers, because this is not just limited to cell phones. You see people who literally, at the end of the day, if you ask them, how many hours did you spend on your computer today? It would be, 5, 6, 7 hours, something like that. And they're going back to the same news sites over and over again, looking for a refresh and how, whatever it may be. It's an addiction. It's an addictive process. So what to do about it? Well, there's, instructions on how to turn all your apps, get the color out of your apps, so when the little explosion goes off, the fireworks congratulating you on winning the game or whatever it may be, it doesn't look quite so bright and colorful, and it doesn't jack your dopamine quite as hard. There's turning off the notifications, because each one is a, neurochemical stimulus. Bing! Hey, look at that! Dopamine. It's practicing safe smartphoning. That's a kind of a cliche, or a attempt at a cliche, but deciding, I'm not going to check my phone for another hour. I'm not going to check my phone for 2 hours. I have found myself, and maybe the reason why this topic resonates with me is because I think I'm a smartphone addict. Hi, I'm Tom and I'm an addict. I'll be sitting there, doing whatever I'm doing, and I'll just pick up my phone and just start browsing through, I'll have a half a dozen news sites open, and Twitter and Facebook and, all this other stuff, and just start thumbing through it. I'm bored. I think that, we need to learn to sit Zen more often. We need to quiet our brains a little bit, and we need to disengage ourselves from these addictive processes. And we need to recognize that just like the tobacco companies started adding ammonia to tobacco in the 1950s and 60s, because it freebases the nicotine. It makes the nicotine go into your bloodstream much more rapidly because it alkalizes it. And so it binds to the more acidic blood that you have. So when you smoke tobacco that has been treated with ammonia, it's the exact same number of milligrams of nicotine, but it hits you more like injecting it than smoking it. It hits you really hard and really fast. And that, just like the tobacco companies have known about this, and they've been doing this for years and years, and we've been unable to stop them. I mean, in the 90s, when the tobacco lawsuits and everything, they're still treating tobacco with ammonia to make it crack tobacco. And the same thing is happening with our smartphones, and the same thing is happening with our computers. And I think, as more and more people are reporting anxiety, and we're seeing this explosion. 15% of the American population in the last year had got a prescription for a psychoactive drug. We're seeing an explosion of this kind of stuff. And we're being told it's all because of Donald Trump. Well, it might be because, we're jacking our brains with our smartphones.